What do you think you're doing in my car? Jessica Turner's voice sliced through the cool morning air, sharp and commanding. Her eyes locked onto the man in the driver's seat of her prized Rolls-Royce, parked in her own driveway. Derek Williams, a man she had never seen before, was sitting there with a calm expression, hands resting on the steering wheel. The car was a symbol of her success, and anyone who didn't belong in it was a threat. She was furious, the disbelief turning into a tight knot in her chest. Get out of my car now? Derek didn't flinch. His eyes remained steady, his posture relaxed, as though he had all the time in the world. He wasn't just a random man who had stolen her car. He was something more, and Jessica was about to learn that lesson the hard way. He simply raised his hand, gesturing for her to wait. I'm not here to steal your car, Jessica, he said, his voice calm yet firm. I'm here to return it. She narrowed her eyes, unable to comprehend what he was saying. Her mind raced, her anger intensifying. Return it? Are you out of your mind? She snapped. Do you think I'm going to let some random person just sit in my car? Derek slowly opened the door and stepped out, his tall figure towering over her as he stood in front of the car. You don't know who I am, do you? He asked, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. Jessica took a step back, her eyes scanning his face, her expression still one of disdain. I don't care who you are. You're trespassing, she said sharply. I'm calling the cops. Derek didn't move. He stood there, calm and composed, and simply let her words hang in the air. Jessica, fueled by anger and entitlement, quickly pulled out her phone and dialed the police. Yes, I need the police here immediately, she said, her voice shaking slightly with outrage. There's a man in my Rolls-Royce, and I think he's trying to steal it. Derek didn't speak, his gaze never leaving hers. The sound of the phone's keypad pressing under her fingers seemed louder than anything else, but in that moment, he wasn't afraid. He knew something she didn't. The police would come, but that wouldn't change the truth of who he was. You should be careful about who you call the cops on, he said, his voice steady. Jessica's frown deepened as she spoke into the phone, giving the police every detail of the supposed theft. Yes, I'm at 451 Westwood Drive. Hurry. When she hung up, she glared at him. You'll regret this, she warned, her voice dripping with venom. Derek took a slow step closer. You're going to regret calling them on me, he replied, his words carrying a weight she couldn't yet understand. As the police sirens grew louder in the distance, Jessica's phone rang with a notification. She glanced at it, a text from her assistant. The message read, Derek Williams owns your company. The words didn't make sense at first, and she couldn't understand why they would. But the reality of the situation began to sink in. Derek smiled at her confusion. I suggest you take a moment and think, Jessica, he said quietly. I own your company, and now I think it's time for you to learn exactly who you're dealing with. I had no idea what was happening. Jessica stared at the screen of her phone, the message blinking in front of her. Derek Williams owns your company. Her heart skipped a beat, and the words felt like a punch to her gut. This couldn't be right. Derek Williams, the man who had been sitting in her Rolls-Royce like it was nothing more than a rental, was somehow connected to her multi-million-dollar empire? She thought it was some kind of mistake, some ridiculous joke. But the uneasy feeling in her stomach told her it wasn't. Derek, standing there with the same calm demeanor, watched her reaction closely. His words echoed in her mind. Asterisk, I own your company. Asterisk, the sirens were getting louder, the police were on their way, and she had no idea what to do with this new information. Was he lying? Or had something happened that she had no idea about? Her fingers trembled as she tapped out a reply to her assistant, trying to confirm the impossible. Derek watched her, his expression unreadable. He didn't look worried, just patient. He had said those words with so much certainty, as though it was common knowledge. But Jessica couldn't process it yet. Not until she saw the evidence for herself. You don't look so confident now, Derek said, breaking her thoughts. Jessica's eyes snapped up to meet his, and for a moment, the anger from earlier flared again. I'll have you arrested for this, she said, though her voice faltered. She didn't know if she was saying it for herself or for the police, who were now just a few blocks away. Derek didn't respond. He only raised his hand, a single finger to his lips, as if signaling for her to calm down. He wasn't rushing, he wasn't angry. He was simply waiting for the truth to sink in. Jessica glanced at the driveway, the distant sound of sirens getting closer. She clenched her jaw, staring at Derek. Why are you doing this? You think you can just waltz in here and destroy everything I've built? She demanded, trying to hold on to her composure. Derek finally spoke, his voice low and steady. You built it, but you never thought about who's behind the curtain. The ones who work for you, the ones you overlook. You didn't see what was coming, did you? He paused, watching her face carefully. Your company didn't just fall into your lap, Jessica. You've been running it with a lot of people's money, and mine's been in it for a long time. You just never noticed. I'm the one who bought you out. I'm the one who made it happen. Jessica blinked, feeling the ground shift beneath her feet. She had spent years building this empire. She had risen from nothing. And now, in front of her, a man she had never paid any attention to, a man who had worked behind the scenes, was telling her that it all belonged to him. The police car finally pulled up to the curb, lights flashing. Jessica didn't know if she should feel relief or panic. She had called them, after all. But now, everything was falling apart. She tried to focus, to make sense of the situation, but Derek's words kept echoing in her mind. Asterisk, I own your company. Asterisk. Derek finally turned toward the police officers as they approached. I'll speak to them, Jessica. I'm not the criminal here, he said calmly. Jessica watched as the officers approached, their steps slow but deliberate. She felt a chill run down her spine as the realization hit her. She wasn't the one in control anymore. The police officers approached, their footsteps echoing in the quiet driveway. Jessica stood frozen, her phone still in her hand, the text from her assistant still glaring on the screen. Derek, calm as ever, turned to face the officers as they stopped in front of him. Jessica tried to compose herself, but her heart was racing. She had spent years building her empire, and now, in an instant, it was all crashing down. Sir, is there a problem here? One of the officers asked, eyeing Derek, who stood with his hands casually by his sides. Derek didn't look worried. He just looked patient. He nodded slowly and looked at Jessica. She's accusing me of stealing her car, Derek said, his voice steady, almost too calm. The officer looked between the two, noticing Jessica's tense posture and the way her grip on her phone tightened. Is that true, ma'am? The officer asked. Jessica forced herself to speak. Yes, she said, her voice shaking just a little. He was in my car. I thought he was stealing it. Derek gave her a knowing look, one that sent a chill down her spine. You didn't bother to check who I was before jumping to conclusions, he said softly. Jessica's face flushed with anger, but before she could respond, the officer spoke again. I'm going to need to see some identification from both of you, he said, his tone neutral but firm. Derek reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, handing it to the officer without hesitation. Jessica's eyes widened when she saw the name on the card, Derek Williams, CEO of several high-profile companies. The officer glanced at the card, then back at Jessica, who was now visibly shaken. You're saying you own the car? The officer asked Derek, his voice suddenly filled with more respect. Derek nodded, his calm demeanor never faltering. I do, he replied. And I also own the company Jessica runs. Jessica felt the air in her lungs leave her. Her vision blurred for a moment, and she had to grip the car door for support. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but the words caught in her throat. Derek wasn't just a random person. He was the one she had unknowingly wronged. She had no idea who he really was, and now it was all coming to light. The officer turned to Jessica, his tone now more serious. Ma'am, we've confirmed his identity. It seems there's been a misunderstanding. Jessica's mind raced. She had to fix this. This is some kind of mistake, she said quickly, her voice frantic. I don't understand. He can't own my company. Derek's eyes locked onto hers, and there was a quiet authority in his gaze. Maybe it's time you do, he said, his words almost too calm for the storm that was brewing inside Jessica. The officer gave a nod. We're not taking any action at this time. If you have any concerns, you can take it up with the proper authorities. Jessica stood there, feeling the weight of the situation settle in. The Rolls-Royce she had prided herself on, the company she had worked so hard for, were no longer hers in the way she had believed. Derek turned to leave, but not before giving her one last glance. I'd suggest you make sure you know who you're dealing with next time, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Jessica watched him walk away, the sound of his footsteps echoing in her ears. The sirens that had once seemed like a sign of justice now felt like the weight of her mistakes closing in. She had built everything she thought she had on her own, but in an instant, It was all slipping away. Jessica sat in her office, the walls feeling closer than they ever had before. The adrenaline from the earlier encounter with Derek had long faded, leaving behind a gnawing sense of dread. The grand, polished furniture around her felt like it belonged to someone else, someone who had control, someone who wasn't her. She picked up her phone again, staring at the message from her assistant. Derek Williams, CEO. She had thought it was a mistake. How could a man like him own her company? How could she not have known? Her fingers hovered over the phone as if they were waiting for permission to text, but there was nothing to say. The reality was clear. Derek had outsmarted her, not by force, but by knowledge, by power, and by a quiet persistence she never saw coming. She had prided herself on being a self-made woman, someone who had fought to climb to the top. But this was a different kind of fight. And now, Derek was the one in control. The phone vibrated in her hand, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a new message from her assistant. Asterisk, the board meeting is at 3. You should be there. We'll talk about how to handle Derek's claims. Asterisk, Jessica's mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. The board. She needed them to back her up. She needed them to stand with her. But what if they didn't? What if they sided with him? Derek had already proven that he knew more than she did, that he had connections she hadn't even realized. What would happen if the board found out the truth? She pushed the thought aside, standing up from her desk. The time for wondering was over. She needed answers, and she needed them now. She walked briskly down the hallway of her office, her heels clicking against the polished floor, each step echoing in the empty corridor. The elevator ride felt long, as if the weight of the moment was pressing on her chest with each floor she passed. The doors opened to the boardroom, where she was greeted by a few familiar faces, but their expressions were guarded. They knew something had shifted. They knew something was wrong. She took her seat at the head of the table, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. "We need to talk about Derek Williams," she said, her voice steady but strained. The board members exchanged looks, and one of them, a senior advisor named Richard, cleared his throat. "We've been looking into his claims," he said slowly, "and it appears he does, in fact, have controlling shares in the company." Jessica's stomach turned. "What? How? How did this happen without my knowledge?" Richard glanced at the others before continuing. "It's been a gradual process. Derek Williams made strategic investments over time, and recently, he became the largest shareholder. He's been involved with some of our major partners behind the scenes." Jessica's head spun. She couldn't believe it. All this time, she had believed she was in charge. But Derek had been maneuvering behind her back, pulling the strings, making the moves she hadn't even noticed. She could feel the room closing in on her. The walls of her empire, her kingdom, were beginning to crumble, and she was powerless to stop it. "So what happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard exchanged another glance with the others. "We're going to need to meet with him. He has a lot of influence now, and if we want to maintain control, we'll have to negotiate." Jessica clenched her fists, trying to keep her composure. She had always been the one to hold the cards. But now, it was Derek who had the upper hand, and she had no idea how to take it back. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. Jessica couldn't focus. All she could think about was Derek's words earlier. Asterisk, "I own your company." Asterisk, how had she missed this? How had she allowed someone like him to slip through the cracks? The reality was settling in. Derek Williams wasn't just some businessman. He was the man who had quietly overtaken everything she had worked for. And now, she was left trying to figure out how to fight back. The meeting ended, and Jessica walked out of the boardroom, her mind racing. She had no idea what to do next, but one thing was clear. She wasn't ready to give up without a fight. Jessica sat in her luxurious office, staring at the sleek, polished desk in front of her. The weight of the morning's revelations settled heavily on her shoulders. Derek Williams had somehow managed to take control of the very empire she had worked so tirelessly to build. She had always prided herself on being the one in charge, the one pulling the strings. But now, she was left feeling helpless, as if the ground beneath her was slipping away. She took a deep breath, trying to push back the panic rising inside her. This wasn't the time to break down. She had built this company from the ground up, and she was not going to let it go without a fight. But where to start? Her mind raced with questions, doubts, and fears. How had Derek done it? How had he gained such power without her noticing? Jessica's hands trembled as she opened her laptop, searching for any clue, any document that could explain how he had orchestrated his takeover. She had to find a way to take back control, to prove that she was still the one in charge. As she sifted through emails and company reports, a realization hit her. Derek hadn't just taken control. He had been playing the long game. Every decision, every investment he had made was part of a carefully laid out strategy. He had slowly and methodically worked his way into the heart of her company, building alliances with the right people, making strategic moves that she had dismissed as inconsequential at the time. Jessica's jaw tightened. This wasn't just business. This was personal. Derek had humiliated her, made her question everything she had believed about her success. And now, he was waiting for her to make the next move. He had already proven he was one step ahead. She wasn't sure how to fight back, but she knew she had to try. Jessica picked up the phone, dialing her most trusted advisor, Richard. The phone rang twice before he answered. "Jessica," he said, his voice calm but laced with concern. "We need to talk. Have you seen the latest reports?" "Yes," Jessica replied, her voice steady but filled with frustration. "Derek has taken control of everything. How did this happen without anyone noticing?" "It's a long story," Richard began. "But we need to focus on what we can do now. We need to confront him directly. We can't just let him keep pulling the strings behind the scenes." Jessica clenched her fists. "I'm not going down without a fight, Richard. But we need a plan. We need leverage, something to turn this around. He's not just taking over the company. He's making me look like a fool." Richard was silent for a moment before responding. "I think I know where we can start. I'll arrange a meeting with Derek. You need to be there. We'll find a way to work this out." Jessica hung up the phone, her heart racing. The meeting with Derek would be her chance to regain control, to show him that she wasn't the weak link he thought she was. She wasn't going to let him win. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much. This was her company, and she would fight to the very end to keep it. The next day, Jessica stood in front of the boardroom doors, her palms sweaty. She could feel the weight of the decision she was about to make, the stakes higher than they had ever been before. She was about to face Derek Williams, the man who had taken everything from her, and she had no idea what to expect. But one thing was certain. She was not going to let him take her down without a fight. The boardroom doors opened, and Jessica stepped inside, her heart pounding. She had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable in all her years in this business. Derek Williams was already seated at the head of the table, his confident posture a stark contrast to her anxiety. The room was quiet, filled with tension, and Jessica could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She walked towards the table, every step echoing in her ears. She could feel the eyes of the board members on her, watching her every move. "I trust you're all aware of why we're here." Derek's voice broke the silence, calm and composed as always. Jessica's gaze met his, and she forced herself to speak, though her voice was tight. "Yes, I am," she said, her words deliberate. She wasn't going to let him intimidate her. "This is my company, Derek. I built it, and I'm not going to just hand it over to you." Derek didn't flinch. He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. "You didn't build it alone, Jessica," he replied coolly. "You built it with the help of people like me. And now, I'm simply claiming what's mine." Jessica's fists clenched under the table, but she kept her composure. "You think you can just waltz in here and take control?" she asked, her voice rising slightly. "You think you can just ruin everything I've worked for?" Derek raised an eyebrow, his expression unchanged. "I'm not here to ruin anything, Jessica. I'm here to take what's rightfully mine. You've been blinded by your own success, thinking you were untouchable. But you're not. No one is." His words stung, but Jessica refused to show any weakness. She had to remain strong, no matter what. "What do you want, Derek?" she asked, her voice now a little more controlled. Derek's lips curled into a slight smile. "I want what's fair. I want control of the company. And I want to make sure that it operates the way it should, without being held back by outdated management practices." Jessica's mind raced. He wasn't just asking for a seat at the table. He wanted everything. He wanted the company she had fought so hard to build, to shape it into something he controlled. "I'm not going to give you that," she said, her voice steady. "You think you can just walk in and take over everything? You're wrong." Derek's eyes narrowed, his smile fading. "You're not in a position to negotiate, Jessica. I've already won." Jessica shook her head, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in her stomach. "No, you haven't won. Not yet. She couldn't let him win. She wouldn't let him take everything from her, no matter how much he tried to manipulate the situation. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, their loyalty uncertain. They knew the truth. They had seen the power Derek held. But Jessica wasn't ready to back down. She wasn't ready to give up everything she had worked for. "I'll fight you for this," she said, her voice now more resolute. "You won't just take my company away from me. I won't let you." Derek leaned forward slightly, his eyes cold. "You don't have a choice, Jessica. You never did." The words hit her harder than she expected, but she refused to let them break her. She had to find a way to fight back. She had to find a way to win. The silence in the room hung heavy as she met Derek's gaze, determined to show him that she wasn't done yet. She wouldn't give up without a fight. Jessica left the boardroom, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. Derek had left her no room to maneuver, and as she walked through the hallway, the uncertainty of her situation gripped her tightly. She had always been the one in control, always the one calling the shots. But now, Derek Williams had taken the reins, and she was left scrambling to hold on to whatever power she had left. The cool air of the building seemed to mock her as she made her way toward the elevator. Her mind raced, her thoughts a blur. How had she let this happen? How had she let him slip through her fingers? The elevator doors opened, and Jessica stepped inside, staring at her reflection in the polished metal. She looked calm, composed, but inside, she was anything but. Derek had already secured control of the company. He had played her, manipulated the system, and now he was in charge. She slammed her hand against the elevator button, willing the doors to close faster. As the elevator descended, Jessica's thoughts continued to swirl. She couldn't afford to give up. She couldn't let Derek win without a fight. But what was she supposed to do now? She had no leverage. He had already taken the most crucial steps, and all she had left were words. But words alone wouldn't be enough. She needed a plan, and she needed it fast. The elevator dinged softly as it reached the ground floor, and Jessica stepped out, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She felt like a stranger in her own company, a visitor in the very world she had created. The moment she stepped outside, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was Richard. "Jessica, you need to come back to the office. There's something you need to see." His voice was urgent, and it made her stomach drop. She didn't even hesitate. She turned on her heel and made her way back to the elevators. Whatever Richard had to show her, it was her last chance to make a move. The tension in the air was thick as she arrived back at the office. She found Richard waiting for her by the conference room, his expression serious. "What is it?" she asked, her voice tight. Richard handed her a tablet. "Take a look at this." On the screen was a document, an agreement that Jessica had never seen before. She read it quickly, her eyes scanning the text, her heart racing. It was a buyout agreement, signed months ago, that gave Derek Williams the right to control the company if certain conditions were met. Jessica's blood ran cold as she processed the words on the page. She had been blindsided. Derek had orchestrated this entire takeover months ago, and she had never even noticed. The realization hit her like a punch to the stomach. He had outmaneuvered her at every turn. Richard watched her reaction, his face grim. "This is it, Jessica. It's all in writing. He's been playing a long game, and now he's won." Jessica's mind was racing. This was not how it was supposed to end. She had worked so hard, fought so fiercely to build this company, and now, in an instant, it was slipping away. But there had to be something she could do. She couldn't just let him walk away with everything. "We need to act," she said, her voice low and steady. "We can't let him take everything. There's got to be a way to stop this." Richard sighed, shaking his head. "Jessica, we've tried everything. He's covered all the bases. He's got the board, the majority of the shares, and now, this agreement." His voice trailed off as he realized how powerless they truly were. Jessica felt a wave of frustration wash over her. She had always been the one to control the narrative, to dictate the terms of every deal. But now, she was at a loss. Derek Williams had beaten her at her own game, and she had no idea how to fight back. The future of the company, her legacy, was hanging by a thread. She couldn't let it end like this. Not without a fight. "We need to find a way to make this public," Jessica said, a new determination building inside her. "If I can expose this, I can turn the tables." Richard looked at her, a hint of skepticism in his eyes. "Expose what? This agreement? The deal is airtight, Jessica." Derek's already done everything by the book. Jessica turned to him, her eyes blazing with resolve. I'll find a way. I always do. Jessica sat at her desk, the weight of the situation settling in once again. The document Richard had shown her was still open on her screen, the buyout agreement glaring back at her like an undeniable truth. She had tried to find a way out, tried to find a way to expose Derek's underhanded moves, but everything she came up with seemed to lead to a dead end. He had outplayed her. The walls of her empire felt like they were closing in, the very thing she had worked for her entire life slipping away, piece by piece. Her fingers tapped nervously on the desk as she thought about her next move. It was clear that Derek had thought of everything. He had covered his bases, made sure he had every angle protected. But there had to be something, some small gap she could exploit. She couldn't just give up. She refused to. Just then, her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from her lawyer, Samuel. Asterisk, we need to talk. It's urgent. Asterisk, the words were simple, but the tone was enough to make Jessica's stomach tighten. She quickly typed back, asterisk, I'll be there in 20 minutes. Asterisk, as she walked out of her office. She felt a sense of purpose flood back into her. She couldn't go down without a fight. Samuel's office was only a few blocks away, but the drive felt longer than usual. Each passing minute only deepened her anxiety. When she finally arrived, she barely had time to sit down before Samuel spoke. I've been looking over everything. The agreement, the shareholders, the board minutes. It's all there. Derek has the power, Jessica. He's played this perfectly, but there's still something we can do. Jessica leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table. What do you mean? It's over. He's already won. Samuel shook his head, his expression serious. No, he hasn't won. Not yet. He paused, letting the words sink in. There's a clause in the buyout agreement. It's buried deep, but it's there. If Derek made certain promises about how he would run the company, we can challenge his control. We need to find proof that he didn't honor those promises. Jessica's heart raced. You're saying there's a way to take back control? Samuel nodded. If we can prove that Derek has breached the terms of the buyout, we can invalidate the deal. But we need solid evidence. And time is running out. Jessica stood up, pacing the small office as she thought about what he was saying. This was the break she needed. If she could find proof that Derek had lied or failed to deliver on his promises, she could turn everything around. But where would she find the evidence? I don't know where to start, Jessica admitted, her voice strained. Samuel's eyes met hers. You know Derek better than anyone. You've seen the way he operates. Think about it. There's always something he's overlooked. People he's pissed off, deals he's made in the shadows. You just need to dig deep. Jessica nodded, a spark of hope igniting inside her. She could do this. She had always been able to turn the tables before, and now she would do it again. As she left Samuel's office, the weight of the situation still hung over her, but now she had a plan. Derek may have outsmarted her once, but she wasn't about to let him win. She would find the evidence she needed, and she would take back control of her company. She wasn't done yet. Jessica sat at her desk, staring at the files spread out in front of her. The office around her felt colder than usual, the familiar warmth of her once-controlled empire, now distant and almost foreign. The evidence she needed was just out of reach, yet every moment felt like she was getting closer. She knew that Derek had played the game better than anyone, but she had never backed down from a challenge before, and she wasn't about to start now. The phone on her desk buzzed, breaking her concentration. It was a text from Richard. Asterisk, we found something. Meet me at the office in 30 minutes. Asterisk, her heart skipped a beat. This could be it, the breakthrough she had been waiting for. She quickly grabbed her jacket and headed out the door. The ride to the office felt like an eternity. Every turn, every stoplight seemed to drag on longer than necessary. When she finally arrived, Richard was already waiting by the door, his expression tight with anticipation. What did you find? Jessica asked, her voice barely concealing her impatience. Richard handed her a folder, his face grim. We've gone through all of Derek's business transactions over the last few months, and we found a discrepancy. One of the major investors in the buyout deal, someone Derek claims to have partnered with, is listed as a silent partner. But we discovered they had sold their stake long before the agreement was finalized. Jessica's eyes widened. You're saying Derek lied about his partners? Richard nodded. Exactly. He claimed to have the full backing of this investor, but the reality is they had already pulled out. He's been using that as leverage to push his buyout forward. Jessica felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. This was the crack in the armor she had been searching for. This could invalidate the entire agreement, she said, her voice steady with newfound determination. Richard gave her a cautious look. It's a solid lead, but we need more than just this. We need to tie it all together. Prove that Derek knowingly misled the board, the shareholders, and the public. Jessica nodded, her mind already racing. We can do this. We need to gather the full paper trail, contact the former investors, and get testimonies. Derek may have thought he could control everything, but he's forgotten one thing. No one controls the truth. Richard met her gaze, his eyes filled with a mix of concern and hope. Are you sure about this? Derek won't back down easily. He's got too much on his side. Jessica stood up, feeling the weight of her next words. I've spent my entire life building this company. I won't let him take it without a fight. He may have underestimated me, but he's about to find out that I'm not someone to be pushed aside. The decision was made. Jessica wasn't just fighting for control of the company anymore. She was fighting for her legacy, for everything she had worked for, and for the truth that Derek had tried to bury. As she walked out of the office, she could feel the stakes growing higher with every step. The battle was just beginning, and she was ready to face it head on. Derek had played his hand, but now it was her turn.